The rain had not stopped for 3 days, and the stone floor of the dungeon was cold enough to bite through skin. Ilara Voss sat with her back against the wall, wrists bound in iron, listening to the water drip somewhere above her. She did not cry. She had promised herself, the night the soldiers dragged her from her village, that she would never let these people see her break. She was a prisoner of Drachore, the kingdom ruled by Alpha King Cassian Thorn, a man whose name alone made grown warriors lower their eyes. For 3 generations, his pack and hers had been locked in a war that neither side fully remembered the beginning of. All Ilara knew was that her home had burned, her brother had not come back from the last battle, and now she knelt in chains in the heart of enemy territory, waiting to be used as a bargaining piece. She had been brought before the throne only once, on the day of her capture. She remembered the throne room clearly, tall windows, gray stone, and a king who looked at her the way a man looks at a stray dog that wandered too close to his door. His eyes were sharp and tired at the same time, as if he had spent years carrying something heavy that no one else could see. He had ordered her locked away without a second glance. She had hated him for that coldness, but some small, foolish part of her had also noticed how his gaze lingered on her face for 1 second longer than it needed to. She told herself it meant nothing. Kings did not care about prisoners. On the 4th night, the dungeon door groaned open, and torchlight spilled across the floor. Ilara lifted her head, expecting a guard with a plate of stale bread. Instead, she saw the king himself, standing in the doorway, with his cloak damp from the storm outside. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice rough from disuse. "I have questions," Cassian said, stepping inside. His voice was steady, but something in it did not match his usual coldness. "I have no answers that will help you," she said. "I am no soldier. I only tried to defend my home." He studied her for a long moment, and she watched something shift behind his eyes, like a door opening onto a room he had not expected to find. He took another step closer, and the moment he was near enough to catch her scent, his whole body went still. It was the mate bond. He knew it instantly, the way every wolf knew it the moment it happened. A pull in the chest so strong it felt like the ground had tilted beneath him. He had heard stories of it his whole life, had almost stopped believing it was real, and now here it was, arriving in the last place he ever expected, wrapped in chains and staring at him with open hatred. He did not tell her, not yet. He could not find the words, and even if he could, he was certain she would not want to hear them from him. "I will have food brought to you," he said instead, his voice quieter than before. "And a blanket." Ilara frowned, confused by the sudden change. Why would the Alpha King care if his prisoner is cold? He did not answer. He only looked at her once more, before he turned and left. And long after the door closed, Ilara sat wondering why her heart was beating faster than it should. Over the next several days, small things began to change. The food improved. The chains around her wrists were loosened, though never removed. A guard brought her a proper blanket, then a second one, when the nights grew colder. She noticed Cassian visiting more often, always with some excuse, always leaving before he said whatever it seemed he wanted to say. She still did not trust him. She could not forget the fires, the screams, the empty space where her brother used to sit at their family table. But she also could not deny that the man in front of her did not match the monster she had grown up hearing about. He asked her questions about her village, her people, her life before the war, and he listened to her answers as if they truly mattered to him. One evening, when he came to check on her again, she finally asked the question that had been sitting in her chest for days. "Why do you keep coming here? You could send a guard. You could ignore me completely. Instead you come yourself, every night, like you are waiting for something." Cassian was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful, like a man setting down something fragile. "There is something about you I cannot explain," he said. "Something that pulls at me every time I am near you. I did not expect it, and I do not fully understand it myself yet. But I know it is real." Ilara felt a strange warmth rise in her chest, quickly followed by anger at herself for feeling it at all. "You capture my people, burn our homes, and now you speak to me in riddles. What am I supposed to do with that?" "Nothing," he said. "Not yet. I only wanted you to know I am not your enemy in the way you believe." She turned her face away, unwilling to let him see how much his words had affected her. He left without saying anything more, but that night, for the first time since her capture, she did not cry herself to sleep from grief alone. There was something else mixed in now, something she could not name. The days passed, and the pull between them grew harder to ignore. Cassian found himself thinking of her constantly, during council meetings, during training with his warriors, even in the quiet hours before sleep. He knew what she was to him now, without any doubt. She was his mate, chosen not by his will but by something far older and stronger than any war. Yet claiming her felt impossible. His court would not accept an enemy prisoner as their future queen. His advisors had already begun to whisper about her, uneasy that the king visited the dungeon so often. One of those advisors, a sharp-eyed man named Drachore, who had long wanted more influence over the throne, saw Ilara as a threat the moment he noticed the change in Cassian. If the king bonded with a prisoner from the enemy pack, it would weaken his authority in the eyes of many, and Drachore intended to use that weakness for his own gain. He acted quietly at first, spreading doubt among the council, suggesting that the king was being manipulated, that the prisoner might be more dangerous than she appeared. When his words failed to turn Cassian against her, Drachore decided on a more direct path. He arranged for a lesser guard, one loyal only to coin, to slip into the dungeon one night, with orders to make the problem disappear before it could grow any further. Ilara woke to the sound of the dungeon door creaking open, long after the usual hour of the guard's rounds. She sat up, heart pounding, and saw a figure moving toward her with something glinting in his hand. Before she could call out, the door burst open again, and Cassian appeared, his eyes blazing gold, the shift already rippling beneath his skin. He crossed the room faster than she could track, seizing the guard and forcing him back against the wall with a strength that made the stone crack. The man dropped his weapon, stammering out Draven's name before he could stop himself. Cassian's growl shook the dungeon walls, but he did not lose himself to it. He held the guard until others arrived to take him away, then turned to Ilara, his chest heaving, his eyes searching her face for any sign of harm. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice raw. "No," she whispered, still shaking. "I am not hurt." He knelt beside her then, ignoring the guards still gathering at the door, ignoring the whispers already beginning to spread through the halls above. He took her bound hands gently in his own, and looked at her with an intensity she had never seen from him before. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "You are my mate, Ilara. I knew the moment I first came to this dungeon, and every day since has only made it clearer. I could not claim you while you remained a prisoner, and I could not protect you properly while I kept this from you. That ends now." Ilara stared at him, too stunned to speak at first. Everything she had been taught about him, every story of cruelty and coldness, stood at odds with the man kneeling before her, his hands trembling slightly as he held hers. "You kept me in chains," she finally said, though her voice had lost its earlier hardness. "You called me a bargaining chip." "I did," he admitted, "because I did not yet understand what you were to me, and because releasing you carelessly would have endangered us both. I am not proud of how this began, but I will not let it continue this way." With that, he reached for the chains at her wrists and broke them apart with his bare hands, the metal groaning before it gave way completely. For the first time in weeks, Ilara felt the full weight lift from her arms, and she looked down at her freed hands, as if she did not quite believe they belonged to her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "Your court will not accept it. I am the enemy to them." "They will accept what I decide," Cassian said, though his voice softened as he added, "But more than that, I want you to choose this for yourself, not because a bond has pulled us together. I want you to know the truth of why this war began before you decide anything about me." He told her then, sitting beside her on the cold dungeon floor, the true history behind the conflict that had shaped both of their lives. It had not started as either pack believed. A betrayal by leaders on both sides, decades ago, had planted the first seeds of distrust, and each generation since had only added more fuel, without ever questioning where the fire began. Neither Ilara's people nor Cassian's were the villains they had been raised to see in each other. Both had lost far more than they had ever gained. Ilara listened in silence, feeling years of anger shift and settle into something quieter, something closer to grief for all the time wasted on a fight neither side had truly chosen. When Cassian finished speaking, she looked at him with new eyes, seeing not the king who had imprisoned her, but a man who had inherited a war he never started, and carried it as a burden he could not escape. "I do not know if I can forgive everything so quickly," she said honestly. "But I do not hate you anymore. I think, somewhere in these past weeks, that hatred already began to fade." Cassian nodded, accepting her honesty without pushing for more. "That is enough for now," he said. "I am not asking you to forget your losses. I am only asking you to let me stand beside you as we find a way forward, together." In the days that followed, Cassian addressed his council and revealed the truth about Draven's plot, stripping him of his position and sending a clear message that no harm would come to Alara under his rule. He announced, publicly and without hesitation, that she was his mate, and that whatever unrest this news might cause, he would face it directly rather than hide the truth any longer. Some among his people were uneasy at first, unwilling to accept a former enemy standing beside their king. But Alara did not hide from their doubts. She spoke with them honestly, sharing her own losses and her own slow understanding of how deep the old lies between their peoples had run. Little by little, the unease softened into curiosity, and the curiosity into something like respect. Weeks later, Alara stood on the balcony of the castle beside Cassian, looking out over the kingdom that had once held her prisoner. The rain had finally stopped, and pale sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in what felt like months. Below them, both packs had gathered for the first shared gathering in generations, an uneasy but genuine attempt at peace. "I never imagined I would stand here like this," Alara said softly. "Neither did I," Cassian admitted, taking her hand in his. "But I am grateful every day that fate brought you to me, even in chains." She smiled, the first full smile she had allowed herself since the night of her capture. Perhaps it was fate's way of making sure we could not look away from each other, no matter how much either of us wanted to at first. Cassian laughed quietly, a sound she had never heard from him before, warm and unguarded. Together they watched as their people mingled below, tentative but willing, the first threads of a fragile peace beginning to weave between two kingdoms that had once known only war. She had entered his kingdom in chains, she would leave it wearing a crown, and somewhere between the two, without either of them fully realizing when it happened, she had claimed his heart completely.